saludo muy especial, compañeros, compañeras, profesoras de la enseñanza al inglés. Primero agradecerles participar en esta capacitación, que es una capacitación que su contenido hoy tiene una relevancia mucho más importante en el contexto que estamos de la pandemia. Desarrollar habilidades para el trabajo con las tecnologías de la información y apropiarse de las tecnologías para el trabajo que cada uno y cada uno de ustedes desarrollan es de vital importancia hoy más que nunca. Agradecerle también a los colaboradores que han hecho posible esta capacitación para ustedes, a la Alianza para el Bilingüismo, a la Embajada de los Estados Unidos, que siempre ha venido apoyando al Ministerio de Educación Pública con diferentes estrategias, a National English Advisor, al Instituto para el Aprendizaje Colaborativo. Recordemos, Costa Rica ha puesto la fe y la esperanza en el proyecto de una educación bilingüe, en una Costa Rica bilingüe para el 2040, y parte de esas estrategias es ese camino hacia esa educación bilingüe que se merece, necesita y requiere nuestro país. Muchas gracias por eso, una nueva felicitación, gracias por todo ese trabajo que hacen ustedes en las aulas que hacen la diferencia de la educación en este país.
Welcome to these trainings that are coordinated by the Ministry of Public Education, the U.S. Embassy, and the great support of our national English advisors. These trainings are also provided by experts of the Institute for Collaborative Learning. These professional development experiences will help you explore new methodologies, new ideas, and to develop new skills in order to enhance the continuity of learning process of your students. You will also have the chance to develop new ideas and new approaches for distance learning. We hope you will find wonderful opportunities to grow in terms of professional development, and you will enjoy and share experiences with other partners. Have fun.
So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed a little break, got some food, relaxed, something nice for yourself, stretched. To pause my video just now and stretch it out just a little bit to get that computer chair back pulled out. So for the afternoon, we've got about an hour and a half left in which we're going to be talking about storytelling. Storytelling is one of my favorite topics to share about because it's where I got my start as an educator. My first teaching job was teaching and running a reading center in a public school in central Los Angeles. So I took over a library that wasn't being used, and I coordinated a team of community volunteers, and we would take students who were behind grade level in reading and give them one-on-one lessons to catch them back up using storybooks. And so I watched the power of sharing stories and how a 15-year-old high schooler who just needed to volunteer for his senior project could come in and read 1 hour a week with a child and a good book, and that child could catch back up to grade level. And so from the very start of my career, I've seen the power of books in the classroom. And even longer than that, I love reading. And it's no accident because when I was a kid, my mom always read to me. And you know, I saw my mom reading books, and she'd take me to the library and I'd watch her get books. And so getting to share strategies that I've developed and seen of how to share books and stories of all shapes and sizes and mediums is something that I really am passionate about. So I'm excited to get to share that with you all. Let me just check the chat down here. Okay, no questions or anything so far. We're all good. So before I get started and share my PowerPoint with some ideas, techniques, resources, and questions and activities for you all, similar to how we did this morning, I'd like to share with you a story. And I'm going to present a story similar to something I might present in a preschool classroom. So I'm sorry if this isn't as interesting as the Netflix series that you're currently watching. It could probably get better. So if anyone from Netflix is watching, I'm sure we could develop the idea, but I'm thinking of presenting something that could work in a classroom. So I'm going to do a quick story. There'll be moments in which I might ask for like student interaction. If you want to type in the chat what you might imagine saying as a student, you're welcome to. If you just want to watch and enjoy, that's good too. So one afternoon, down by the ocean, there was a shark named Timothy walking along, and Timothy realized something. Timothy was feeling very, very, very. How do you think Timothy is feeling? What do you think, class? How does Timothy feel today? Ah, yes, Carla, Gabby, Ana Muriel. This is the biggest preschool class I've ever taught. Timothy today is very hungry. And when Timothy thought, I am hungry, his belly got very big and his eyes got very big and his teeth got very big. So Timothy was walking along the beach, and do you know what he saw? Do you know who this is? He didn't see a whale or a mermaid, but those are things you could see at a beach. He saw Chester, the squirrel. Yeah. And Timothy got an idea. He walked up and he said, "Hello, my name is Timothy." And Chester said, "Hello, my name is Chester." "Hello, Chester. I am very, very, very hungry." "Oh, I am happy to have a new friend. Let me think. Do you like apples?" No, I don't like apples." "Oh, do you like carrots?" Class, do you like carrots? Oh, Sylvia doesn't like carrots, but Rebecca does. Well, Timothy thought for a second and he said, "No, I don't like carrots." Chester thought for a second and he was starting to get scared. Timothy is very hungry. Do you like peanuts?" "No, I don't like peanuts." "Do you know what I like?" Chester was very, very scared. He had one more idea. What do you think Chester got? Andrea says, "Chester, run." You think he likes meat? Yes, I like meat. I like very tasty meat. Oh, you know what else you like? Water! And Chester ran away. And he left the beach as fast as he could. And he got home and he was very, very tired. And he said, I'm hungry. I think I'll have a healthy snack. The end. And that is the story of Chester and Timothy. Hi. Hola, niños, escuchando las historias. Mucho gusto. Bienvenido a la aula. Hello. I saw some comments in the chat. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you for all the feedback. It makes it feel much less like I'm standing here alone in my room talking at my computer and much more like I'm with you all. So that's very nice to hear. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope for those of you who were able to get your kids in, they had fun too. And I could already see some people excited about the possibilities of how to do that in their own online classes. So I love sharing excitement around storytelling. And I'd love to share with you some of the ideas on what I think about when I plan something like that. And to show you all of the different ways and techniques that I might bring stories in the classroom, and to also get some ideas from you all so that we can share and really see, because I think of storytelling and it's such an essential human tradition, right? For longer than we've had any of these technologies, stories have been the technology, the way that we share knowledge. And so as teachers, I think it's one of the oldest arts of teaching. And so I'm excited to explore that with you today. So I have some questions for you. I'm going to go one question at a time. If you'd like to share in the chat some thoughts you have, that would be great. The first question is, how often do you tell stories in your classroom? In a normal classroom setting, how often do you think you use stories? Got Monica, a few, and Sylvia coming out once a day. A few people maybe once a week or on a specific day of the week, like Friday, at least once a month. Preschool very often. Okay, so it seemed like everyone at some way, shape, or form brings stories into the classroom. It's definitely a part of what we do. And some people are doing it every day, and some people are doing it every month, and that's kind of the spectrum inside of where we're at. So the next question I have for you, how often do your students tell stories in your classroom? It's gonna be hard to know where these stop, but I'm gonna give it like 10 seconds and start looking at the answers and saying, these are answers to the question, how often do your students tell stories? Okay, so I'm hearing sometimes, once a week, never, all the time. Asking me how often I do it, I will answer my own questions. I promise not to just be the questioner. Oh, they always tell it in Spanish. I think that's a great point to bring up, that our students are absolutely telling stories, and maybe a lot of the times they're telling them in Spanish. I saw a stand-up comedy video on YouTube the other day. I almost wanted to make it a part of this presentation, but there was some inappropriate language that I didn't feel comfortable bringing into an academic setting. But the stand-up comedian's point was, kids are horrible storytellers. Kids throw you into story and they're like, oh, so there was a dinosaur and his name was Jonathan and he was running and there was this magic crystal and he grabbed the crystal and he ran with the crystal and he took the crystal up on top of a mountain. There was another dinosaur, it's a bigger dinosaur and a smaller dinosaur. You know, there's a lot of stories going on, and that might be coming at us in Spanish or English, you know, and he was laughing about that first moment when a child tells a good story, you know? Oh, I went down to the beach. I saw Uncle Johnny. He was kissing a new girl. And you're like, what? That was a story that made sense. It's interesting. It's intriguing. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about, that one of the ways and skills that our students are developing as active learners is their ability to tell stories, right? I know that one of the biggest challenges for me in terms of finishing my lesson plans is when the circus comes to town. Oh man, when the circus comes to town, you go into class, it's Monday, how is everyone today? Profesor, yo fui al circo, yo vi el payaso, se llama Brujo, yo también fui, había un hombre en un moto. And it's like 15 minutes of all of the children telling their stories about the circus. And so one of my pressures is, oh, they're all sharing so many of their stories and I have this huge lesson plan and I want to get through everything today. And those are moments when I really try and come back to this idea that stories are a really essential way that humans share information, right? That for me to say, stop telling your stories, stop talking about the circus, you listen to me. It's saying, hey, you, the student, don't be the active learner here. Be the passive learner. Let me be the storyteller of the class, and you're just going to listen to me. And it might be good for them to hear me tell stories. But if I think about that child that tells stories that don't make sense and misses details, and I really don't understand what they're saying outside of what language they're using, and then that his older brother who can tell a clear story, I think about how much practice it's going to take for that child to get from one place to the next in their skill. And so thinking about, you know, yes, it's one thing for me to plan moments of me telling or reading stories in the class, but am I also creating just as much active practice for my students so that they don't just have input around stories, but I can trust that them telling stories in Spanish about the circus, right? I'm connecting with what you're saying early and others saying that they're really frequently sharing their stories in Spanish. There are storytelling skills inside of that that are going to help them tell stories in English too, right? Understanding how to communicate the plot, the setting, and the characters, a sequence of events, all of those basic elements that are in every good story, regardless of language, come up in telling good stories. And so all of that is things our students can be doing to interact with this topic. So the last question I want to ask you before I share some more ideas of my own experiences and see what questions you all have is, why do you use stories in the classroom? Thinking back to the question we started about this morning, about what are our goals for our students and how our objectives reach those goals. What are your goals and why do you bring stories into the classroom? Why is it important? Natalia, I see what you're saying. And yes, time is always going to be a limiting factor, right? So we can't just let our students go wild and spend 20 minutes talking about the circus, you know, but I do think it's important to have that voice present, because I definitely as a teacher have that voice constantly sitting on my shoulder saying, you've got 40 minutes, Matt. You've got to use them as effectively as possible to cover the curriculum. Like, I know I have that voice very strong. So I also want to develop in my voice a voice inside of myself that says, my students using language to try and communicate and share their ideas and thoughts creatively is what they need to be doing in a language classroom, right? Not that one voice is right and the other is wrong, but when I have both of those voices, I can start as the teacher balancing both of them. Okay, so to come back to the questions we had about these, I'm seeing we use stories to create engagement, to reinforce specific themes, like specific language themes, because students love them. I think that's a great way, right? We want our students to love their learning. And if this is a strategy they love, it's great. We can present vocabulary. Yeah, I think there's a very multifaceted way to the way vocabulary comes across through a story, being visual and contextualized and verbal and everything. So the next thing I want to have before we move on is, what questions do you have for me? In the rest of this presentation, what are some of the things you hope to learn about storytelling? And then hopefully I can try and cover those as we talk through these slides. And if not, point you in the directions of resources that can. So what questions do you have for me about storytelling in the preschool classroom? Is my goal that students learn particular vocabulary, because that might lead to a certain way of how to do it? If my goal is that my students move their bodies around in specific directions and it's more of an energizer moment, the story is just a way to get them to move their bodies, maybe I do it in a different way. So for me, how really connects to why. How long can a story be? I think I would come back to that. I'm going to come back to that later. So I have a moment to definitely check in and talk about with that. Creatively, we're going to go through a bunch of different strategies of how to bring different ways and layers of creativity. Length of story coming back again. How to make it understandable. Okay, great. So keep throwing your questions here. I have the chat up on a separate screen, so I can keep bringing them in, and I'll try and address them later on in moments when they do come up. And please hold on to them. There'll be a moment at the end for questions. So if I don't answer your question fully, please follow up with me more. I'd love to create as much interaction between us as possible. Students saying not in English because they don't understand how to deal with that. Okay, great. So when I think about storytelling, I think there's a lot of different intentions. For me, these are all the different answers of why to use storytelling in the classroom, right? We can use storytelling to present and reinforce vocabulary and grammar. We can develop literacy skills, right? This is a book. I turn the pages left to right. The pictures tell a story. Look at the pictures and make a prediction. We can develop listening and speaking skills. The way we interact with stories in a group setting really creates this multi-skilled approach where you're looking, potentially reading, listening, and speaking all at the same time. Integrating critical thinking skills, right? That question of how do you think the shark is feeling? The fact that you all said hungry isn't an accident, right? And yes, we all just went to lunch, maybe we're hungry, but there's this association we have of an animal with big teeth, and you use your critical thinking to say big teeth, it must have a big belly, sharks are known for eating, it's a hungry thing, right? So even that is a layer of critical thinking that we could use depending on the types of questions we ask. To develop the phonemic and phonic awarenesses that we were talking about in the morning, to develop community, creativity, pro-social skills. There's a great series of books we'll deal with later by Mo Williams that all center around these really great values of inclusivity and thinking about one another's feelings. And they're my favorites for teaching those types of citizenship skills and just for enjoyment. So all of these are different ways that stories can be used. Now, some of these in the preschool classroom, specifically a lot of them around like the literacy skills in reading and writing, those aren't going to be how we're presenting stories in the classroom, right? And it's interesting because if I say stories in the classroom, the first image that might come to your head is a book. At least for me it is, because as a child, there were a lot of books in the classrooms I was in. And probably a majority of the stories I remember were in books. Big books, small books, every kind of books. And I think there's a lot of different ways to integrate stories into the classroom, and books are only one of them. And especially with preschoolers where the written words on the page are much less important, I think it's going to be interesting for us to explore what other types of mediums can we use. Because I think once we get away from words on the page, we know how to speak to our students, right? If I'm speaking with my student in English, even if they're saying, profe, yo no entiendo, háblame en español, por favor, es más fácil. I know that student as a human being. I know their vocabulary and how to communicate with them. And so I can overcome that. I think it's when we attach ourselves to the words on the page of a book or the words in a video story on YouTube that the students don't know those words, because that book or video doesn't know our students, right? So we have to be the conduit between those two. So next, we're going to talk about 4 different strategies for storytelling. And I'm hoping that a lot of the challenges that you all brought up in your questions of how to be a good storyteller, how to overcome challenges with language and keep students interested and engaged will come up in these strategies. So I have this like another mini quiz. Which of these 4 answers, it shows the 4 categories of strategies for telling stories? Is it A, script, theatrics, props, and active engagement? B, speaking, listening, reading, and writing? C, Romeo, Juliet, Jack, and Rose? D, books, videos, audios, and applications? So I'm going to wait for a few more answers to come into the chat, but which of the following are the 4 categories of storytelling strategies that you think I'm presenting today? So I am asking you to guess a little bit. So if you don't get it right, it's okay. We're just guessing. So I'm seeing A, B, some D. Alrighty, so the answer, drum roll, is A. Today, I'm going to be talking about script, theatrics, props, and active engagement. B, speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Typically, I think of those as the 4 skills when we're thinking about language teaching, right? I want my students to be learning speaking skills, listening skills, reading, and writing skills. Those can all be integrated into storytelling lessons. But for me, they're not particular strategies. They're categories of language learning. So again, I chose that answer because I think it's connected to storytelling, but I don't think those are strategies as much as those are answers to that question of why. Oh, today we're telling this story so that my students can practice speaking and telling their own story about Timothy the Shark. It's a speaking class, right? My story is just the model for the speaking I want them to do. C, Romeo, Juliet, Jack, and Rose are the romantic couples from the movie Titanic and Romeo and Juliet play. So I didn't see anyone get that. So that's great. I know you at least know those stories. And D, books, videos, audios, and applications. Those are all different mediums. And at the end, I will talk about resources and things you can use to tell stories. But I want to share with you strategies that you can use with any kind of story. So I'm going to talk through some strategies that you can use with books, strategies you could put into a story video, strategies you could use with a story audio, or strategies that might combine with some high-tech applications to create some interactive learning for your students. So these are the 4 words that we're going to be talking about. Earlier, we were talking about how you all bring stories into the classroom. And I noticed that almost all of you are bringing stories in at least once a month, if not more, up to every single day. So thinking about what you do with storytelling, what as a teacher do you do to interact with the script of the stories that you read? What decisions are you making when you're thinking about the script? So these are what I'm thinking of when I think of what those words mean. I wanted to give a pause there just to give you some space to be thinking about how those words might connect with what you do as storytellers. And I want to share with you how these words connect with what I do as a storyteller. Oops. So for script, we're thinking about the language, all of the words associated with a story. So that when I'm thinking about choosing, which book do I want to take from the library? Which picture cards do I want to choose? What am I going to say aloud while I'm holding the shark and the squirrel stuffed animal? All of those thoughts are me thinking about the script of my story, okay? So we'll talk more about that later, but that's one of the categories we're going to explore. Another will be theatrics. What am I doing like an actor or actress to bring the story to life? What am I doing with my voice and my body so that it's more than just words on a page? Props will be talking about any kind of objects or music or environmental things brought in. And then at the end, active engagement, which is what we're doing to keep our students interacting with us. So to go through these topics more in depth, first I'd like to talk about script. For me, this is the strategy that I think is most applicable to that question we were talking about earlier in terms of what do I do when my students complain about the English, or if they say, I don't understand, right? Because there are some theorists who say that children will learn language if you just give them enough comprehensible input, right? Stephen Krashen's theory is if students understand books and you just keep reading them books all day, one day they'll speak a language, right? So whether or not we believe fully that view, we know that for a student to benefit from a story, we want them to understand it. And I think this is one of the most critical decisions to affect that. So if I'm at Centro Espiral Mana, I have access to this wonderful library of children's books that we very fortunately had donated to us. And so I can walk around the shelves and think, which of these books do I want to grab? Which one do I think leads to language? Maybe language we're already using. Maybe this month, a lot of the activities we've been doing is likes and dislikes with food. So I want to find a book that connects to the language we've been using that's talking about what characters like and don't like with food. And that also is at an appropriate level. Another question that was asked earlier is the difference between native and non-native contexts. For me, I think one of the differences I can think about is most books are written with an imagined audience of a first language student. So, or like a first language speaker. So when you think about the complexity of the story and the complexity of the language, they're matched to the imagined age of, say, a preschooler who's speaking English as a first language. So, for example, there's a book that I remember loving as a kid. My mom read it to me every night before bed when I'm writing her my Mother's Day card that I gave to her last Sunday when we celebrated Mother's Day up here. I wrote a mention of this book there, and I loved it. She donated it to our library, and I went to read it to my students, and it's full of language that I realized as an ESL teacher, my students don't understand this, right? The vocabulary of a fourth grader in their first language and their second language is really different. So when I choose a book, first, I need to choose a book thinking which book has a lot of the words that I think my students will understand. The other choice that I have here is, how do I want to change the language? I want you to think about something. what was the script of the story I presented at the beginning of this presentation? So that story, I have 100% control over what words I'm going to say. If I'm speaking to a specific classroom of students and I'm creating a story like that, I can write a script where I know 100% of the words are words my students have been exposed to. So I think your questions all center around a very real reality of this. If our students aren't understanding what's going on in the story, they're not going to be engaged and they're not going to be interested in the activity. They'll get distracted and they'll walk off to touch a toy in the back of the classroom, right? So one of the ways we can support that is by choosing stories and then adapting the words in the book to say other things, right? There are maybe 12 books in the library of 500 children's books that we have at our school. There are 12 that I will read without changing any words in them. Every other book we have, I will change at least one word as I'm reading it out loud to a class. And I change different words depending on what age I'm reading to, right? So especially for those teachers who are teaching at preschool and elementary and potentially beyond, you can use the same book, and by making an adjustment in the words you say out loud, change the level of the language in the story. And as you get dealing with older students, this won't come up in preschool, it's a really interesting test, because when a student comes to you and says, "Profe, ¿por qué usted está cambiando las palabras? Lo que está escrito en la página no es lo que usted está diciendo." That's really good feedback that you have a really strong reader in the room, right? When you've got a student noticing that, that's a huge, huge sign for you to be like, this is a student I can really challenge and ask some tough questions. So that's what I want to encourage you to think about script. So choosing a story with a meaningful context, with an appropriate language level, where there are language skills and vocabulary in the story connected to what the students are working on in the classroom. And then feeling free to change and adapt the words in the story. Down here I can't read your name for the way it's written, but that one of the people in the chat says that even in Spanish, that's what she does with her son. She changes the words. And I think as teachers, we're really good at establishing language that our students understand. And we just need to not be worried about changing a word just because it's printed there. And then creating a script for a visual story that doesn't have words. That's basically more or less what I did before, right? Now the visuals I was creating live with little stuffed animals, but I'd like to take a chance for you all to try that now. This is be a fun moment. If you have a child close and you'd like to do an activity, if they're peeking around the corner curious, like, what's my mom or dad doing over there? If you want to bring them over and take this moment, you're more than welcome to. Look at this 6-panel comic that I have. I want you to look at these images and imagine using these images as a way to tell your own story about a hungry shark. So you don't have to unmute your mic or anything. Just do this quietly to yourself, or if there's someone nearby, you can do that with them. But take a quick minute to just think of what the story could be. Try to invent a script using language that could work for 4- and 5-year-olds. Alrighty, so I hope that gave you some time to be thinking and try out a little bit, at least to come up with some language that you might use to narrate what's going on here. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear how that experience was for you, what it was like trying to think of how you could put language to these pictures that your students might understand and think was funny or interesting or somehow exciting. So you're welcome to share those thoughts. If not, that's all good. But again, I think, there is a challenge with this, right? One of the benefits of picking up a book off of a shelf is that someone else has already made all of the artistic decisions about what words go in the book and what words don't, right? So as a teacher who has a limited amount of time to plan and prepare my classes, the book can be really nice. It's ready to go and it seems all together there. So my piece of advice, if you're going to use books, don't consider the script done, right? You need to bring the script to life. You know your students and your books don't. Oh, Melissa, yay. You had to make sense of the drawings. I hope you got to do that with someone that you love and you had fun and smiled. And I'm going to imagine that, and it's going to fill me with joy. Thanks for sharing. So something like this, bringing script to a comic strip, might be a little bit tougher in terms of the time it takes, right? There's more artistry, right? I had to actually draw this. It's a quick drawing. It took me 5 minutes on my tablet, but it did take time, right? But there's a balance there, right? I think the moments that I'm spending thinking up what words should be in the story or what words need to change are also those same moments that I'm thinking, what am I going to do in the classroom? So it comes back and pays dividends. So the next strategy I'd like to talk about is theatrics. How does the teacher present the story? What strategies do you use to tell the story to bring it to life? Oh, that's so great, Dunia, that you had a lot of crazy ideas and your mind was flying. I hope I can see you as a born storyteller. So I'd love you all to think back to the story I told in the very beginning. What were the things that I was doing with my body and my voice to bring the story to life? Share some of those ideas in the chat. What were the strategies around that you saw me using? Or if not, what were some strategies that you like to use with your students and specifically your body and voice? We'll get to other things afterwards, but when I think of theatrics, that's really the acting that I'm doing to bring something to life. So we're hearing a lot of like playing with voices, changing voices, using body languages and gestures, facial expressions, and some movement around the room too. Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these are really, and these are great because these are things that I don't have to prepare. My voice and my body, it's very, very hard for me to arrive to a class ready to teach without those two things. If I found a way to get to the class without a voice or a body, I've got big problems. So I really like thinking about these strategies. And as a kid, I was in a lot of acting programs, so I also take to them naturally. And I like that. I like bringing something to life, even as much as, and you saw a lot of ways that, we can think about how this connects to meaning, right? Oh, I have a big shark and I want to make him scary, so I'm going to have a deep voice. I have a chipmunk and I want to make it small, so I'm going to have a smaller sounding voice. So there's ways that I'm doing things to communicate meaning. One strategy I've used that can be really effective when I'm reading a book is I've had in a class that has trouble sitting still. I'll have all of them sit in their chairs at their seats. I will stand up with the book and I will walk in circles around the whole class, showing them the book. So I walk around the very outside. So for the student to follow the story, they're just slowly moving their head to follow me around the room. And even that can be enough of a physical stimulation to keep an energetic 3 or 4-year-old sitting down for a little bit longer and keep their mind focused on what you're doing because their body has some movement there too. It's a little bit harder to do in a Zoom call. I guess I could have walked around my bedroom and had you looking at different parts of your screen. But in person, that's another nice way I like to use my body to bring things to life. So using gestures was one of my ideas. You can see a lot of what y'all are saying, TikTok effects. Ooh, I like that. I like that we're now getting into, okay, if we're gonna be teaching digitally, what are digital effects that we could do? This is something brand new. I haven't even thought about this. So my video editing preschool teachers out there, that's my challenge to you. I can't wait to log on to the MEP resources website and see some really cool storytelling, like explosion videos and things like that. So having students chant or repeated words or phrases, kind of turning pieces of the story, that's kind of like where the script becomes a voice thing. Using pauses. I think one of the things that I do a lot in my own practice is getting students to think about what might come next and make predictions. Remember, one of my big goals is I want students to grow big imaginations. So I tend to use that question a lot of what might happen next to try and flex their imagination. And creating those pauses, right, by not saying things, it also creates a space for the student to be the storyteller. And I'm going to be real with you. Someone gave me an idea in the chat while I was telling that story. And I was like, oh, I really like that idea. I'm going with that idea over my idea. So also sometimes dramatic pauses turn student creativity into, ooh, that's a really cool direction to take my story if you're making it up live. Using different voices was one of the ideas we talked about in chat. Facial expressions that match. One of the hardest things to do when reading a book is to make an inference. An inference is when we figure out something that's not written. And the most basic level of inference that's easy to start out with students, even at this preschool age, is how is this character feeling? Because I never tell you, right? Like what we were saying before, I never told you the shark was hungry, right? Most books don't always say the feelings of every character in every moment. And so having students think about that is not only a practice of the literary skill of inferencing, it's a practice of that humane pro-social skill of empathizing. How does another person feel? And for a 3-year-old, that's a big challenge, to get outside of your own experience of life and to get into the feelings of another being, to even just know that other living things have feelings just like me, is one of the big learnings in this 5-year span of time that we're inside of. I will say though, make sure that you don't think that speaking slowly will make a book that's printed work perfectly. I still think you need to have made the decisions first about script and know what you're going to say, and then say the words your students know slowly and clearly, is how I would frame that one. That just speaking slowly isn't enough to make sure people understand. So I want to have another storytelling moment and share with you another strategy. So the last medium that we interacted with was a comic. These are photographs from a book. This is one of those 12 books I was telling you about. Mo Williams has a series of elephant and piggy books. They are my all-time favorite. When I have a child, I will be buying the entire Mo Williams collection. If I ever move to a new country or school, or this would be the first thing I would ask for my classroom. I love these books. Mo hasn't paid me to say any of this. I don't know Mo. So this isn't any kind of, this is just a shout out for how much I love the art this author has created. And I think it works really great in the class. What I love most about these stories is they deal with big ideas using small words. So one of the challenges, to come back to that idea of how does everything we know about storytelling in a first language context come into a second language storytelling context? One of the challenges in working with students in ESL is the books that are at the language level they can read are really boring, right? A 10-year-old who's struggling to read in English, who can barely sound out, Pat the cat has a hat. Their literacy level is there, but that story isn't interesting to a 10-year-old, right? 10-year-olds watch complicated television shows and tell complicated stories to their friends. And all of that. Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat and make sure I'm not missing things that people are throwing in that. So that's what I love about these books. I find that these concepts and what they're talking about here, like this whole story is about what do you do if there's something going on that you don't like, right? Which is one of the most frequent conflicts in a preschool classroom. Teacher, él me está tocando. And it's like, okay, you don't like that? Tell him you don't like that, right? Like that's my goal, is that my student becomes an autonomous communicator who can say that for themselves. And so this story centralizes around that theme with really short words. And then I really like these characters because I think they lend themselves to theatrics. Look at that page right there that goes, ah! Even for a student who doesn't know anything about phonics, they can look at how big that is on the page and understand what's going on with that too, right? So there's a lot of visual cues helping students understand. So now I'd like to stop talking for a moment and give you all a chance to try and tell this story. Now, I want to invite you to experiment with theatrics. Take advantage of the fact that your microphone is mute. Try to experiment with creating a different voice for the pig and a different voice for the elephant. And try to really get up and act with it, right? If you've got someone there with it and you want to present the story to them, great. If you have two people and you want to try making two different voices, you can do that too. But take a minute to play with this theatrics and how you can use your body and voice to bring these 8 pages of story to life. Alrighty, so I hope you had some time to play with some voices there. And yes, it is pretty funny that I just learned that about these books. I will have to tell my students when I get back. Guess what I learned while I was away? I learned an elephant wears glasses, just like Teacher Matt. So again, I think these also, all of these strategies come back to answering that question of, my student is bored, my student doesn't understand, my student wants this story in Spanish and not English. Because when I read these stories, here's how I read it. Gerald? Yeah, Piggy? There is a bird on your head. There is a bird on my head? Ah! Hey, Piggy, is there a bird on my head now? No. Now there are 2 birds on your head. Right? And so I use those voices, and because I have a collection of these books and these characters keep coming back, my students know those voices go with those characters. So even though, so it gets a lot of that same similarity of watching a TV show, right? That dog on Paw Patrol has the same voice every single episode, and that helps your child understand. Same, the voice that I bring to this character is more or less always the same. That's funny that I4CL was using same voices. Yeah, it just comes from me looking at it. That's just the voices I see with them. And I think all of those things start making the story more multidimensional, right? I think about what we're doing right now. One of the technology challenges that we haven't been able to overcome today is getting you to see my face and the PowerPoints at the same time, right? But I think it's really important to have the visual input of what you're looking at connected with what I'm saying. So in what I'm doing right now, I'm thinking about what you're hearing, what you're doing, and what you're seeing, and how that all comes together to help you understand. And so with my students, I want to do the same thing. What are they seeing? What are they hearing, right? And not just what words, but what are the voices they actually hear? The problem is that you forget the voices. I think that happens too. I think slowly my voice changes. I don't think it's really a problem though. One of the things that's amazing about stories, like if we compare the experience of a child sitting here watching you do this and read a book with voices, or watching a YouTube video, is between each page, the characters move. And in a book, you never see that. And so there's more space in a book where the child watching has to use their imagination to fill in those spaces, right? So with a book, you're already activating a more active viewership. The person listening to the story is already being really creative, and their imagination is very active because they need to be filling in the blanks. So if your voice is shifting around a little bit, it's okay. I think that heightened imaginative state is when people are willing to be a little bit more flexible. So I've never had a problem I'm sure that across the last 4 years of loving these Elephant and Piggy books, the voice has changed and a child has never called me out on it. And I know they would, so I think we're good with that. So take risks and experiment with voices if it sounds fun for you. And that's fun too, to think about, you know, one of the comments I was seeing earlier was how it sounds like what I'm talking about is TPRS, total physical response. And how the teacher can be doing movements and voices, and how we can also get our students involved doing movements and voices too, right? Like I can imagine reading this page and the students always do the voice of the pig and the teacher's always the voice of the elephant. And we read the whole book back and forth after they've memorized this story. Okay, so the next category I want to get into, because I saw a lot of you already starting to talk about it, is props. So props are all the other materials that you use to bring a story to life. Any additional visual, oral input. So again, oh, here I see one connected back to that last strategy. Araceli is saying that she's trying to use Lesco because she has a deaf student. Araceli, that's amazing to hear. We as an institution have just started learning Lesco in 2020. We worked with a deaf teacher in Costa Rica, and we've partnered with Hands-On Learning in San Jose. We've all started learning Lesco. We've got a local student who comes to do a language exchange with us. And it's actually something I had mentioned earlier in terms of phonics and thinking about how that movement can connect with sounds in a really powerful way for students who are hearing, in addition to Lesco serving as a tool for students who are not hearing. One thing I also have heard is that it does, that young learners, pick up Lesco very, very quickly, right? And it ties into that same thing we're talking about, where imagine if this whole webinar, all you had was my voice, right? That there is no PowerPoint. Even if you can't see me, there's no PowerPoint later. The only thing you get to do is hear me for 2 hours. I think it would limit the amount that I'd be able to cover. I think I wouldn't be able to say as complicated of ideas. And I think it would limit how much you all would understand. And so I think of those things like Lesco and like all of the other inputs that we can bring as all of the other clues to help our students create understanding, right? So in thinking about props, y'all saw me use a handful of props, right? Puppets, finger puppets. These aren't even puppets, right? I just found these. These actually like have a little voice recorder and you talk to it and then it records and speaks it back. They're my dad's. He loves them. He talks to them when he's lonely and no one wants to talk to him. And so you can use all kinds of things to create a story based on what's around you. We can use visuals for the place or the characters, right? I didn't even think about it, but I totally got lucky and happened to be wearing a shirt that's printed like the ocean. And as I was looking at my reflection, I was like, oh my gosh, they're at the ocean and my body is the ocean. This is perfect. Right? One of the ideas that was shared in a presentation of this a while ago that I really liked was creating a PowerPoint, and you could project images on the wall behind you, so that when the characters go to the beach, there's the beach behind you on the wall. And then when they go home, there's a wall behind you, or like a house behind you on the wall. And I think all of those create these really multi-dimensional moments where our students can get a lot of different input to make sense, right? Because that question we keep coming back to of, no entiendo, profe. When our student is sitting in front of a TV, they find a way to make it work, right? When the TV isn't going to react, like maybe they change the channel, so they have some agency there, or they go to a different YouTube video. But when they're just in a position where they can't have any interaction like that, our students find a way to make it make sense, or they watch and make sense of what input is there, right? So I think when I hear that, what I'm really hearing is my students saying, I need more input from you. The input I've gotten so far isn't enough. Give me more input, right? So in general, if I'm hearing that, I would probably come back to one of these strategies and say, what's something new that I didn't do today that I could try next time, right? Maybe this student is a very strong auditorily, and if I start doing funny character voices, it's gonna tap into their learner skill. Someone earlier asked about big books. A big book for me, I think all of the strategies that I'm talking about here are strategies I use when making a big book. For me, the few differences are when it's bigger, it's physically easier to see. So if I'm doing young elementary school and I am teaching phonics and reading, a big book might be really critical because I want each of my students to be able to see the letters as I'm sounding them out. Luckily for us in preschool, that's not what we're covering. So if the book is smaller, it's not important that the students can see the letters, right? I want my students to understand that I, the teacher, am looking at letters and making sounds, but that's all they need to understand about the letters on the page. Just the concept of letters make sounds. All the rest we'll save for elementary school. So I think smaller books or any other kind of visual support, like just using puppets or stuffed animals, can work excellently in preschool because it challenges us to focus on the phonology of it and not the specific literacy of it. And then the other thing a big book does is it lets you completely create it. But I don't have big pieces of paper at my house, right? If I was at Centro Espiritual Maná with Mary, I could get a big piece of paper right now because we have that at our school and I could make a big book. I don't have any of that here, but I do have 2 stuffed animals and some food from the refrigerator, right? So what I see is a big book is more about the actual material than the strategy. What I do with a big book is the same as what I do with a small book. So yeah, it's also just fun that it's really big, but it can also be fun if a book is really small. It gets everyone interested. We pass it around, we practice sharing and saying please. So other things in terms of props, making students do a role play, giving them masks, all could be different ways of visualizing it. I could see a story where the students are making masks to become one character and then they go back and read it and they're doing the voice for that character, right? And maybe the kid, or ooh, that's a cool idea. Araceli's saying that she likes to change the story and remix it. Okay, now the wolf is gonna be good. Okay, now let's all make, one of my favorite kid stories is, yeah, that one of the big bad wolf being good, and to kind of make that a live experience. Okay, now you're gonna be the bad guy. Tell the story about from your perspective and how things were okay for you, right? You know, that starts tying into this deeper level of empathy again, thinking about 2 people's different perspectives and how a situation might affect different people differently. And there can be a prop element of that with masks, and there can be a theatrics element with students speaking. And there's even a script element of it in terms of, you know, thinking what words do you change in the story to lead you there? That's a really cool idea. Another suggestion was background music or sound effects. I think, again, ways to tap into all of these things go back to those fundamental skills we talked about in the morning, right? If a student hears sound effects coming out of my iPhone of waves crashing at a beach, they understand we're at a beach if they know what that sounds like before I've ever said any words. So now the words are just that extra. And so every word that becomes easy and automatic for them to get frees up their cognitive load to focus on other keywords in the story, right? I also like the idea, once we're all physically back together, of decorating or arranging a class differently. Or, you know, if there's a story that's really nice and you're reading the Lorax, for instance, to go outside, and a story that's all about speaking for the trees, to go out and read it with the trees, you know, or going to different spaces, but thinking about how many of our students' senses can we interact with. Another thing I was thinking about as I was doing all of this was, how fun would this story be if in the middle of the story, after the squirrel holds up the bag of carrots and says, "Do you like carrots?" and the shark says no, then the squirrel could look at the students and say, "Do you like carrots?" And the students could all try a carrot and we could talk about carrots, right? That, you know, if I'm somewhere where I have that ability to know my students don't have allergies and I want to make that, now we're tasting the story as it's going along, right? Now all of that language that I'm saying out loud keeps coming more and more alive in new ways, right? And now there's this subtle theme inside of my storytelling unit about, also, let's practice eating healthy snacks. The final strategy I want to talk through, and I saved the best for last, is active engagement. This was something that we were talking about earlier. I saw some of the comments in terms of when I was asking you, what do you do when students What do you do with students in the classroom to tell stories? So one of the most popular questions I saw at the beginning from all of you was, how long can our story be? How long should it be? I think that's is an important question, but there's a more important question inside of that. So I want my story to not be too long, right? If I try to tell my students the entirety of The Lord of the Rings and read them a 300-page novel, their memory isn't developed enough. Their like medium-term memory isn't developed enough to categorize all that information fast enough, right? So that story, absolutely, you can have a story that's just too long and complicated. But I think the more important question is, how long do students go between moments of active engagement? So a rule I want to jump ahead to, oh, it's not here yet easily. Oh no, it won't go back. For me, when I'm reading out of a book, on every single page of the book, I need to be asking my students a question or giving them some kind of activity or way to interact. Every single page. Maybe with a book like Elephant and Piggy, I'm doing every 2 pages because like this is 2 pages right here and it just says, ah! But yes, for that much of the story, I'm going to stop and ask my students a question. That's going to do a few really critical things. First, it's going to check back in with their attention. Remember what we shared earlier, that every year old a child is more or less a minute they can sit still doing a task. If you've got a 3-year-old in their class and you try to read them 3 pages and it takes you 3 minutes, you've now lost their attention. Or if you read 2 pages, ask a question, but they're ignoring that question and you read 2 more pages, they're gone, right? Their attention needs to be checked in with actively more often. If the teacher isn't giving their brain and their body something active to do, their curiosity will find something active to do. So that's my technique. Every page, in general, every single page, I want to be doing something that my students are getting active with. And it can be many different ways, right? Students look at the pictures in a book before reading and making predictions. This is a really nice way to get your students practicing the structure of a story, right? And again, I think this is a strategy that we can do very productively in Spanish. Again, we're supporting bilingual students. For our student to grow up and be bilingual, they need to speak English and Spanish. And knowing one language very well will help them learn the other language well, right? In addition, as a language teacher, I know if someone has the schema in their head of what they think a story is going to be about, every step of the way and every page of the book, they're going to understand more of the words. So a very, very direct recommendation, if you have a student who challenges you after a story and says, "Eso es aburrido, yo no entiendo nada, quiero que me lo dices fácil como mi papá en español." If you've got a challenging student like that, try taking them on a picture walk. The whole class, right? Before you read a book, look through the pictures. Choose 4 or 5 pages. Show them a picture near the beginning. Talk about what's in the picture in Spanish and ask your students what they think is going on in Spanish. Then flip a couple pages and show them another picture. Then another and another. I pick pictures that I know don't spoil the surprise ending of a story if there is a surprise ending, but I let my students talk about what's going to happen. And I think that's a really beneficial conversation to have in Spanish.
Hey, Matt,
because, yeah?
we have a special visitor, and so at some point soon I'd love to interrupt so we can let her say hi.
Okay. Sure, can I get 2 more
Yep.
minutes and then pop off my screen sharing for a sec?
Absolutely, absolutely. Just want to let you know.
Okay, great. So I think that can be a really great technique to try. Talk through the book ahead of time, have your students make some predictions, because that process will get them thinking, okay, esa historia se trata de un elefante y un chancho. El elefante parece un poquito molestado, hay unos pájaros, no sé por qué están en la cabeza, pero yeah. And now all of that's going on inside our students' head, so that now as we say words in English, those words can fit into the structure they already have.
Hello, Lauren. This is Lauren Garza. She's the Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in San Jose, Costa Rica. And we just want to thank you for taking a minute to come join us. You are on our spotlighted video now, and you're unmuted.
Oh,
so
great.
You have power and voice to talk.
Awesome. Well, so how many people do we have here, Mary?
271, and then on Facebook we have another 30 or 40.
I did see that it's live on Facebook. That's awesome. Well, I just dropped in. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Matt. I hope you don't totally lose your.
I needed water. It's good.
Hope you don't. And I have a preschooler and a kindergartner, so what you're doing is very relevant to my life. I saw Elephant and Piggy when I first logged on, and we read a lot of Elephant and Piggy. So, but anyways, I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer. I'm Lauren Garza, and I work with the team that provides the funding and works closely with Mary to make these happen. So Mary is the expert and the magician to pull all of this off and to provide these resources. But just wanted to pop in and say hello and congratulate you all for taking the time to devote to doing a program like this. I know life is really turned upside down for everyone right now, including me. I'll have to hop off in a couple of minutes to put my 5-year-old on his next Zoom class. But I know that everyone is trying to adjust and do what they can during this time. And so I think your commitment to professional development and improving your skills is really laudable, since many of us are just trying to keep getting up and doing the minimum every day. It's really amazing. You're putting the time into improving your skills. And at the embassy, we support you. We will continue to support you. As I said, I've got little guys, and so I fully understand how important it is. Their learning and their development, and so your work is so important. For the future of this country, because you really set kids up for success. And we arrived here a year ago. My kids are learning Spanish as you're teaching kids to learn English, and so we're going through it at the same time. But it's really amazing to just see their little brains kind of absorb everything. But especially recently, I've realized it's thanks to good teachers like you all that make that happen for them and help them learn in the ways that they can learn best. We know that English skills are so important for the workforce when they become older. They'll be able to get better jobs and better paying jobs, and so it's really important for the economic development of this country. So you all are critical to that success, and the U.S. Embassy is here to support you through trainings just like this one. I know Carmen has been with you for other parts of the day, and hopefully she mentioned the resources that are available to you all that are free. So as you have time, those things are constantly being updated, and so please do go and check back and let us know how we can continue to support you. So that's it from me. Again, congratulations. Good job on all your hard work, and we look forward to meeting with you and hope to work with you down the road. So, and a big thanks to Mary for putting all of these webinars on, so that she can share her expertise and skills with others.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. And you've got a lot of thank yous in our chat, in our group chat, which is very sweet. I don't know if you can open that up and see, but there's a lot of people writing and saying hello. That's one of the nice things about this medium, where if you came to our face-to-face training, you don't get all of these sweet written messages. That's really sweet. And thank you all for sending Lauren messages. That's awesome.
I'd love to just see, if you have wanted to share something that you've learned in this training, I would love to have somebody to kind of hear what you learned.
Sure. So you guys, you can either write in the chat if you would like to share. Would you like to say something? You can raise your hand electronically, and we can actually unmute you right now, so we can hear some more voices. Co-host, I4CL team, let's keep an eye out for somebody raising their, I just saw somebody physically raising their hand. Juan Carlos, I'm gonna unmute you. So feel free, everybody can write in the chat at the same time. Juan Carlos Lopez, would you like to say something?
Well, just thank to all of you. And definitively, I'm going to use a lot of these strategies with my kids, especially because now I'm using technology through WhatsApp and Teams, Microsoft. And this Friday, I will start with preschoolers, and definitively, I'm going to use all of this.
Thanks so much. This is also a whole other dynamic here. It's there's a different rhythm in how we share when we're actually speaking. Teacher Araceli, would you like to go? I'm going to unmute you. Teacher Araceli, please, you've got the floor.
What I'm going to say, or what I want to say, thank you to all of you, to Matt, to Lauren, to you, because also having people from all around the country on one workshop, physically it's almost impossible. So we can learn from each other. I know that we are from different places, so all the experience that we're getting from each other and from Matt, because, wow, he's a great teacher. So it's just amazing, and I know that we can improve a lot, and that kind of workshops can help us to do that too.
So I was telling that at the end of the presentation, I will share with you some materials that we have on a shared drive. All of them you can find on the American website, and I will give you the information at the end.
Okay, great. Great.
That's it.
Thanks, Carmen. And thanks, Lauren. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. I think we'll go back to Matt. Because Matt, you have a bit more of your presentation to go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to Matt. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the support that you all have given us. And Carmen, we look forward to seeing the links to those materials later on too. Thank you all so much. All right, Matt, take it away.
All righty. Lauren, good luck with Baby Zoom. I can't imagine how funny and challenging that must be. So I'm excited to hear stories about Baby Zoom next time we talk. And for all of you who have your own small children that you sit down in front of Zoom, my hat is off to you. I think that's I know how much I have to hype myself up to come and spend all day sitting in front of the video camera. So to do that with small children, I see you as heroes. Alrighty, y'all, I'm gonna get back into our presentation for a last little bit before we wrap up. Start broadcasting my screen here. There. So we were wrapping up, finishing talking about suggestions I have around active engagement strategies. Trying to create a big bank of types of activities and questions and things we can do with our students so that on every single page and with a lot of frequency, I'm getting my students to be active and do things with what they're hearing and understanding about the story. So we just finished talking about doing a picture walk and how doing a picture walk in Spanish can help scaffold a student to then understand a story that might not be there bilingually yet. Another thing I can do inside of a story is have students answer yes or no or open comprehension questions. Now, if I'm working with a story that my students are giving me feedback that it's challenging for them to understand, or I'm early on in the year and my students aren't understanding a lot, it's going to be a lot easier to do yes or no questions, right? Especially because that's something I can have them show me with a thumbs up or thumbs down by shaking their head. And so physically they can answer those questions, and it's much more limited in how to respond. Whereas those open comprehension questions can be really great, but I might direct them more towards something like, how could the shark be feeling? Where there's no definite answer, right? I hadn't told you anything, so you were really just guessing. All that matters is that you're saying a word that matches up with feelings. And that leads into the next strategy of students talking about how each character is feeling, how that is inferencing at a really basic preschool level. One I love is having students make sound effects. I think, again, it gives the students a way to use their bodies while leaving the verbal part and the linguistic part of their mind free to focus on what they're hearing. Their mouth is producing, but it doesn't have to be producing language, right? Because for these small learners, producing English or Spanish or any other language they might speak is a challenge. They're young enough that just speaking is a challenge. And so giving them space to interact and use their mouth will let them explore the sounds of their own mouth without having to necessarily be producing verbal content while they're also receiving it. Having students guess what happens next. I think that's a really nice way to check comprehension about what's happening, right? A lot of times there's a lot of foreshadowing in stories designed for children. It's very obvious what's going to happen next. So if you ask that question, students who can see what's naturally going to happen next are showing you, I understand the structure of this story, right? I know enough about stories to recognize structure and know, oh, well, every time they couldn't find the duck before, they went to a new location. So I think they're going to go to a new location next, right? Any student who can answer that, and even if they tell me that in Spanish, as we were in between conversations, I saw some comments about, again, you know, the challenges of when you've got one student who might be translating English to Spanish for others and all of that. Just in the same way that we talked about how phonology is this really fundamental skill, and just being able to hear sounds with our ears is the basis for everything else. Being able to understand
Okay, my audio is gone. Matt, did we lose you? I think we might have lost. Yeah, I can't hear either. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear Mary speaking? Okay. All right, let's check in with Matt. Give us a minute. You know what? This is a perfect time for you guys to stretch and do an eye break, a little eye exercise. Remember looking about 70 yards away or 17 feet. I can't remember the amount. So let's take a quick break while we find Matt. He's coming back in. Somehow he must have fallen out. 7 meters. Thank you, Carla. All right, Matt's back in. Let me give him the power he needs to be able to say what he needs to say.
Hey, I'm back.
Great.
Guys, that was my big fear. My iPad got sleepy and the app just froze up. And suddenly on my phone went off. No sound, no sound, no sound. And I was like, I've been talking to myself. what I was afraid of. So that's interesting. It's sharing that story. So I need to share my screen again because that's not my computer anymore.
Okay, hold on a second.
I'm trying. I think I can just hold me off. There we go. Okay, so we're back. We've got sound, we've got visual, we're good. Thanks for bearing with me for that. Thanks everyone who gave the feedback on not being able to hear. Having students read chorally. Now, again, at a preschool level, they're not going to be reading along with the letters, right? They're going to be repeating chorally. They're going to be saying what they hear you saying and repeating that with you. But there can be a lot of playing with voice there too, right? Having the students make voices. Having students use those puppets or role plays, right? I really like that, you know, this category, if we look, the start of every strategy is the student does this, the student does this, right? And so we can take tons of those strategies about what the teacher does and put that on the student to also create active learning for them, right? What props could the students use to make an interactive experience, right? Do the students put up little hand binoculars and look and try to find every bird on the page? But what are they doing actively? So this is a PDF document that you will have access to afterwards that just takes all of those ideas I just shared with you and collects them into a single page you can look at. What I really want to invite you to do, because so many of the ideas that I'm seeing here are things that you all shared in the chat at the beginning. So I know that all of you in those stories you're reading once, twice a month, up to once a day, you're using strategies like this. I want to encourage you to experiment with other kinds of strategies you might not normally use. For instance, I know that when I was a kid, I was an actor. So theatrics, I'm always going to use, right? That's my natural mode. I use a lot less props. I don't know why. I really like them, but it's just not naturally what I will do. So one of the things I've been doing as a teacher to grow is saying, okay, most of the storytelling strategies I use are in this theatrics column. What are some strategies from props that I can challenge myself to use? That's going to push me to give more input. And it's going to help those students who want to understand our story, right? They want to understand. They want to listen to the story and enjoy it. It's joyful for them. And so if we push ourselves to use more strategies and provide more multi-dimensional input, then our students are going to get to that comprehension and enjoy what we're doing more. To quickly recap, all of the different activities we did highlighted some different resources. Unfortunately, like Mary was talking about, I can't send you a PDF. I know that's done. I also know that because of the public nature of what we're doing and the fact that I'm presenting to 300 people, for me to come here and say, here's Mo Williams' book for free is rude to Mo, right? Just like as a teacher, I want to be paid for my art when I teach a class, I want Mo to be paid for his art when Mo writes a wonderful book. So I can't give you any PDFs for free. I do know a lot of online ebook websites are offering free access to children's books because of the stay-at-home global situation. So if that's something you're interested in looking at, I've been seeing different things there. Everything I've seen depends on region and where you're based. So I don't have something that I know works accessing it from Costa Rica. So one resource we have access to is books, right? And knowing we can change the words in any books, even if you can just find a book in Spanish, a student who doesn't know how to read doesn't know it's not in English, right? You can say anything you want. You could print out pictures from Google Images and staple them and have your own picture book, right? So that's one way to use the function of a book, which is paper in a stack like this. Here's another example that Ivan prepared. It's a photo story, right? This is the story of his daughter, Alejandra, celebrating her, her 10th birthday. And so he just went through photos that he had on his phone naturally and created a story to tell about his own life, right? And again, I think this starts to become really powerful because my students, they know Elephant and Piggy because we read those books, but they really know me. They care about Teacher Matt. And so when they're reading a book about Teacher Matt, or seeing a story that's photos of me celebrating Christmas with my family, that's a meaningful context. They're going to try even harder to understand that because they care about me, right? Or they care about Ivan and his family. Another resource that we talked about was hand-drawn stories. I see Sandra's sharing Audible. Yeah, Audible was one of the websites. I didn't want to say it out loud because I wasn't sure if accessing it from Costa Rica, it's free. And because I'm in California, it's hard to check that. But that's great that Audible has some free audiobook resources. I think it's a really easy way, whether you hand draw stories, you go, make a PowerPoint and put images from Google in the same way that you might, make a printout. I think there's a lot of really creative ways. I really just want to show you all of these to get you beyond thinking the pictures need to have the words already, right? If y'all add the words, that's where you're going to be finding the most success, or if you adapt the words. I have had some experience using ebooks, and I think they're wonderful. This is the author of the series Captain Underpants. He has written a graphic novel series named Dogman. I read this with elementary schoolers. So this is a little bit much for preschool, but what makes this a successful experience when I'm holding my iPad in front of the classroom or doing this live in a video conference setting is it's really, really visual, right? Because it's drawn like a comic book, the ratio of how many words to how many pictures is really low. Right there it says calling all cops or just hey, right? Think about how much of the story is communicated, and I can move my hand in like that. And there's a lot being communicated visually. The amount my students understand when I read this story to them always surprises me because the visuals are doing so much. This story isn't free. Each of these books is worth about $5. One of the things I like about ebooks is I've lived in El Limbo de Peñas Blancas for 5 years. I know that books in San Carlos are a temporary resource. La humedad se coma todo, right? So for me as a teacher to buy $100 of books that I know are going to be eaten by bugs in 5 years scares me. I have this ebook on my iPad, and when this iPad breaks, it will be on my next iPad, my next one. As long as the internet exists, I'm good to go. So I did have to pay for it, but I've now invested that. And like we were saying, I think now is a great time to try and find some of these resources online. But what's really nice is that it lends itself to a very visually rich form. So that's the last I want to share about that. Here to share a quote with you: questions are creative acts of intelligence. I'd love to open up chat for some questions. And if anyone wants to raise your hand, we can unmute your audio and we can get that up too. Any questions you have about storytelling or any topics from the morning as well before we wrap up the day? I see some people in the chat are organizing groups and everything. I think that's wonderful. I think that's one of the strongest ways to leverage when you have a large group of people who are good at and like making materials. Because if each of you spends the time to make one really nice comic story and then shares them, you've now got 30 stories, right? And you might need to edit each one a little bit, but I think creating networks like that is a great way to get around the, I don't want to spend $15 to buy a book that I can use in class 3 times. So I think that's really nice. About the length. So in general, I don't have a specific number of how many pages. I would say in the same way I'm thinking about organizing a preschool class, I know if I keep my students in the same classroom formation and the same interaction pattern for more than about 5 minutes, I start to lose them, right? So I can be creative with that. Maybe I'm reading a story where halfway through it, they go outside and go camping. And so I read the first half of the story, we line up by the door, we go outside, we read the second half of the story, and then we go out to recess, right? So maybe that's a way that I can have a break in the middle where we stand up and move somewhere else. And now I can just spend about 10 minutes doing that. But just because we're talking about storytelling, everything you know about preschoolers is still true. If you try to have them sit still for too long, their curiosity and the energy bouncing around in their bodies is going to pick them up and move them somewhere else. So I would say in total, you know, the session of storytelling might be 5 to 10 minutes, but if you're going to shoot on the longer end of that, think about where in the middle you're going to do a big shift of energy. And then from there, kind of make sure that all of the smaller moments, every single page has a moment of active engagement, because that will keep your students on the small scale also engaged. Alrighty, well, thank you very much for all of your active participation.
We have been working with Mary and Matt and Carmencita and the Rocio and all of the regional advisors to, you know, to produce this. This has been a long time working, you know, and I hope so that you really enjoy it and you are going to take all these recommendations that Matt did today, and you're going to put it in practice with all the students. And we are very happy and very satisfied that you come over and take this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for all the kind words you're sharing in the chat as well. It means a lot to me. I appreciate that. I see a lot of the work that many of you are excited and actively doing and trying to form a professional developed network among yourselves, which I think is fantastic. There are certain features of this video call that we've turned off to try and keep the webinar focused and to, you know, minimize tech issues, but I really encourage you to stick with that idea. If the tech's not working exactly right now, to get everyone in it right now, you know, I would check in with your regional advisors and try to use that system that we already have in place of networks around the country, because I'm sure that in addition to everyone in this call right now who's excited to be in that WhatsApp group, you've got other great preschool teachers who are somewhere else working hard on something else right now who would have wonderful stuff to share in that group too. And I think when you start getting that going and you're sending materials around to one another, that's when all of this energy to learn and bring new curricula to life is going to start moving really fast and take off, because we're doing it together.
Yeah, and I'm so excited about this day today and all that we've learned by being with you all, because I think we can really find some ways to create a virtual community of practice that we can all contribute to and support each other. So I'm really excited about that idea, and so yeah.
Paula's asking an interesting question that says, in preschool, you send some activities to the parents of the kids and they practice with their kids, but they don't speak English. I would like advice in that case. I think it's a great question, and I want to talk about it because what we know about how the brain works leads to that. I think that's a very natural thing happening. There's a phenomenon called in bilingual children and multilingual children called this word in English. I don't even know how to say it in Spanish, and in English I can't get over it. This is my pronunciation challenge for everyone. Compartmentalization. That's it. It's the Spanish. There's like 3 extra syllables in there that always throw me. Okay, so compartmentalization. Basically, it means that children learn to assign different languages to different contexts. We've got a bilingual family very near and dear to our hearts. They're a part of our community in Alinbu. And their son, who is fully bilingual, speaks fluently Spanish and English, he will only speak English to his mother. She speaks Spanish. He hears her speaking Spanish. He speaks Spanish. She's heard him speaking Spanish. But if he's choosing to talk to his mother, it will always be in English. Now, if his neighbor comes over and his neighbor doesn't speak English as well, if he needs to ask his mom something, he will ask his mom in Spanish. There's never a discussion around that, right? These aren't house rules that they established. It's what's naturally going on when we're dealing in the world of bilingualism. So it's something that I have to work a lot with, helping parents understand. Because what I'm hearing there is a fear of the teacher and the parents, right? Oh my gosh, the student isn't speaking. They're not practicing. They're not learning. They're not benefiting, right? And I also hear, well, I want them to do this and they're not. I think it's natural for them to not be speaking English at home, right? It's going to take them a while to be speaking English in the classroom, and it's going to take them longer to be speaking it at home. What I really want to connect with is thinking about both from storytelling and from the phonology piece that we were talking about earlier. Let's remember how many fundamental skills are inside of the linguistic skills here that students can practice in any language, right? Because if a mom is telling a story to her son in Bribri and doing comprehension questions on that story, that child is learning about the sequence of events in a story. And they're learning about making predictions, right? It doesn't matter that it's not in English. Really, the amount of vocabulary that a student learns in preschool doesn't connect with how well they're going to speak English when they're an adult, right? The amount of content we cover isn't the biggest thing we can give. The biggest thing we can give is a love of language. And I think any parent at home can do that if they have the time and the materials. So I know there's a great challenge in front of you all about how to make those materials, but I know that there's also great solutions inside of that. Mary?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about, this virtual training was not about teaching in the time of crisis necessarily. But I think there's a lot of things you could also do to help enhance the exposure to English. For example, by you all telling the story and sending it in an audio or a video through WhatsApp. So very light load. So that the parents too, because I would imagine sometimes the parents, at least some of the parents that come here, they feel a little bit bad that they don't have enough English. They would like to have more English, but they're too busy working, or they haven't learned, or they're not intrinsically motivated. They know it's good for their kid, but maybe they haven't gotten it. And so I think there's ways that we can also create materials, and you could create materials to send home so that they can listen to the English. So that's my 2 cents worth on that. You all are pioneering out there, right? We have starting out having English in preschool. It's fantastic. But we work in a couple different countries, and I want to just tell you how amazing Costa Rica is doing. You all really, it's amazing to be able to have English in preschool, in some preschools, and to know that that's going to grow, and to know that when they go into elementary school, they have a very coherent program. We are all part of something incredibly special. And I know that everybody here at the Institute for Collaborative Learning feels that, and we hope that you feel it too. It's a really nice collaboration. And it's a blessing. It's a blessing what Costa Rica has in our Ministry of Education. In spite of the challenges and the problems, I'm sure we can complain about a lot of things. And if we focus on all that we have, we'll see how much we have, and also how much we have in comparison to many other countries and many other public school systems. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think
Mary,
that,
I got a question in the chat a couple times, so I wanted to make sure I got to answer that before we wrap it up. But then you're about to wrap it up, yeah?
Yeah, we have 136 responses, so we're hoping that
Cool.
you guys can all respond, so we can get your attendance in here. So please.
Yeah, so the question that was coming up a couple times is with regards to whether I think it's a good idea to teach phonetic symbols in the preschool classroom. When I read that, I could see it going 2 different ways. If you're thinking the actual like IPA, like actual phonetic symbols, or if you just mean like the letter lexemes that match to sounds typically. I mean, like, could you present it in a classroom? I think the question really is twofold. One, do your students know enough of the fundamentals to be ready for that? Do they know all of the phonology and have all of their phonemic awareness so that they know the whole auditory part and they're ready to start focusing onto that? Because as soon as you introduce this new system where now every letter has a name and a sound, and some of them are different, there's more complexity. And then when you add another layer and you say, oh, by the way, every letter actually has 2 names, because when you're with teacher Matt, it's A, but when you're with teacher Juan Alberto, it's A, right? That complexity starts getting huge. The research that I've done and my personal pedagogy in the kids classes that I teach on weekends kids from 3 to 13. I don't introduce the letter names of English until around 10 or 11. I want my students to be fluent and functional reading and writing in Spanish. And once that is a strong skill, my personal approach is to then support that with more writing in English. But I want to get them having that perfectly down in Spanish before I add the complexity in my classes of, oh, by the way, these letters have other names. So I hold off on phonics because, like you were saying earlier, we're limited in time. 40 minutes goes quick. And so if I have to be strategic in choosing, yes, I know my student needs phonics, but I know they have about 3 more years where the curriculum is going to keep pushing them towards phonics. Whereas I'm the teacher who gets the curriculum dedicated to phonology and has the curriculum with space for phonemic awareness. And so I really want to make sure that I'm taking advantage of my time to cover those, because if a student gets to 2nd grade and they've missed some of that phonemic awareness, then they're going to start struggling with the phonics on top of that. So I hope that answered your question. I'll be hanging around a little bit for more. There was also a request in the chat earlier. They asked if I could sing another song because I had done the me, me, me. I got our voices warm, but I didn't actually. So during break, I rummaged through my closet and I actually found a guitar. So I'm going to play you out. This is the goodbye song that I actually end my preschool classes with. So this is you all astounded me with your presentations. I loved hearing everything you had to share. And so as a thank you for that, I'd like to share my goodbye song with you all. So goodbye. Thank you for sharing. And I hope to see you all soon and more frequently. Can you hear that? I don't have my amp.
Yeah.
Goodbye, 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 my friends. Goodbye, 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 my friends. Goodbye. Goodbye, teacher Araceli, Calarina, Adriana, Ivan, Nicole, Ophelia, Rocio, Roger, Mary, 9474849, Abba. Goodbye, 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 goodbye.